The fluorescent lights of Angelo's family restaurant buzzed overhead as Rebecca Stevens counted the crumpled bills one more time. $12. $12 for 4 people on her children's 7th birthday. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the worn 1s and 5s on the sticky laminate table, trying to make the math work in her head. 3 chocolate milks. Maybe 1 plate of spaghetti they could share. The triplets sat squeezed into the booth across from her, their identical faces bright with the kind of hope that made Rebecca's chest physically ache. Then the door opened. The temperature in the restaurant seemed to drop 10 degrees. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Rebecca looked up to see a man in an immaculate charcoal suit standing in the entrance, flanked by 2 others built like refrigerators. His silver hair was swept back from a face that could have been carved from granite, and when his dark eyes swept the room, grown men looked away. Dominic Montanari had just walked into their birthday dinner. Rebecca's breath caught. She knew that name. Everyone in this neighborhood knew that name. And from the way the owner, Angelo himself, came scurrying from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron and stammering a greeting, she knew this night was about to become something she couldn't predict. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. All right, let's get back into it. The vinyl booth squeaked as Rebecca tried to make herself smaller. Emily, Noah, and Sophie, her 7-year-old triplets, sensed the shift in atmosphere the way children do, their chatter dying down to whispers. Emily's small hand reached across the table, sticky from a single breadstick they'd been sharing. "Mama, can we still get the spaghetti?" Rebecca forced a smile, her throat tight. "Of course, baby. It's your birthday." The lie tasted bitter. She'd already done the math 3 times. Spaghetti marinara was $8.95. 3 chocolate milks at $2.50 each meant $7.50. That was $16.45 before tax. She was short. She'd have to ask them to skip the milks, watch her babies' faces fall, explain again why they couldn't have what other children took for granted. The restaurant was half empty on this Tuesday evening. The dinner rushed long past. Red checkered tablecloths covered 20 tables, most of them unoccupied. Framed photos of the old country lined the walls. Vineyards in Tuscany, the Amalfi Coast at sunset. The air smelled like garlic and tomato sauce and basil, since that normally would have made Rebecca's mouth water. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch. The triplets had to eat first. Always. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She didn't need to check it. It would be another text from Jerry Kowalski at the property management company. Another threat about the eviction notice. Another reminder that she had 72 hours to come up with 3 months back rent, or they'd be on the street. 72 hours. $3,000 for $100. Might as well be $3 million. Noah was watching her with those 2 old eyes, the ones that had aged a year in the 6 months since David died. At 7 years old, her son already knew how to read her face, to gauge their situation by the tightness around her mouth, the way she held her shoulders. "It's okay if we just get water, Mama," he said quietly. Sophie kicked him under the table. "It's our birthday, Noah." "I know, but—" "Hey," Rebecca interrupted, reaching across to take all 3 of their hands. "It's your birthday. We're having chocolate milk and spaghetti, and that's final." She'd figured out. Maybe the waitress would let her wash dishes. Maybe she could beg Angelo to let her come back tomorrow with the rest. Maybe she could perform a miracle with $12 and faith the size of a mustard seed, like the Bible stories David used to read to the children before bed. Before the accident, before the medical bills, before the insurance company found that tiny clause on page 47 that let them deny everything, before the world revealed itself to be a machine that ground up people like her and her babies without even noticing. The waitress approached, a young woman with kind eyes and tired feet. Her name tag read Maria. "What can I get for you folks tonight?" Rebecca opened her mouth to order, but movement near the entrance caught her eye. The man in the charcoal suit, Montanari, was looking directly at their table. His gaze held hers for a moment that stretched too long, and she felt something shift in her chest. Fear, recognition, something else she couldn't name. Then he turned away, following Angelo toward the back of the restaurant, his bodyguards trailing like shadows. "Ma'am," Maria prompted gently. Rebecca blinked, refocusing. "1 spaghetti marinara, and 3 glasses of water, please." "Mama." Sophie's protest was immediate. "Water's fine," Noah said firmly, shooting his sister a look. Emily, the quietest of the three, said nothing, just squeezed Rebecca's hand tighter. Maria looked at the children, at their mother, at the crumpled bills on the table. Something soft moved across her face. "You know what? It's pretty slow tonight. I bet Angelo wouldn't mind if I brought out some garlic bread. On the house. And maybe some of that chocolate cake in the back that's just going to go stale anyway." Rebecca's vision blurred. "You don't have to." "I know," Maria said simply. "But it's their birthday, right?" The triplets nodded eagerly, and Maria winked before heading toward the kitchen. Rebecca pressed her palms against her eyes, willing herself not to cry. Not here, not in front of the children. They'd seen her cry too many times already, when their father died, when the bills started coming, when the eviction notice arrived. They needed her to be strong. They needed her to be the wall between them and the world's cruelty. But God, she was tired. The medical debt alone was crushing. $847,000 for the 3 weeks David spent in ICU after the construction accident. The insurance company had denied the claim, citing a pre-existing condition David never even knew he had. Some heart abnormality that supposedly contributed to his death, never mind that a falling beam had crushed his chest. Then came the funeral costs. The mortgage payments she couldn't make on her salary from the call center alone. The credit cards she'd maxed trying to keep them afloat. And finally, 3 months ago, losing even that job when the company downsized and she was deemed redundant. She'd spent every day since filling out applications, going to interviews, begging for work. But gaps in employment history raised questions. And who wanted to hire someone with triplets who might need time off for school plays and doctor's appointments and the 1,000 things children needed their mother for? So here they were, $12. For people, one birthday that would probably be their last before the shelter system swallowed them whole. Across the restaurant, Angelo was seating Montanari's party at a large corner booth. The crime boss, and Rebecca had no illusions about what he was, sat with his back to the wall, positioned to see the entire room, including her family. She felt his eyes on them again and looked down quickly, focusing on the triplets. "Tell me what you wished for when you blew out your candles this morning," she said, trying to summon cheerfulness from some deep reserve she didn't have. "You're not supposed to tell, or it won't come true," Emily whispered. "Then tell me something that made you happy today." Sophie brightened. "Mrs. Johnson gave us cupcakes. She made them special because she remembered our birthday." Mrs. Johnson was their elderly neighbor, living on Social Security in the apartment next door. She'd bake cupcakes for the triplets despite having less than they did. The memory made Rebecca's throat constrict again. That was very sweet of her. "And Tommy Peterson shared his chips at lunch," Noah added. They were naming charity. Kindnesses from people who noticed 3 children wearing clothes that didn't quite fit, shoes with soles wearing thin, the particular hunger that free school lunch programs couldn't quite satisfy. Rebecca's babies had become the recipients of pity, and the knowledge burned like acid in her stomach. Maria returned with the garlic bread, a full basket, steaming and fragrant, and 3 tall glasses. "Chocolate milk," she announced, setting them down with a flourish. Angelo's orders. Birthday special. The triplets' faces lit up like Christmas morning. "Maria, I can't," Rebecca started. "You can," Maria said firmly. "And you will. Spaghetti's coming right up." She disappeared before Rebecca could protest further. Dominic Montanari watched the scene from his corner booth, his expression unreadable. One of his associates was talking about territory disputes on the east side, but Dominic had stopped listening 3 minutes ago. He'd noticed the woman the moment he walked in. Hard not to. She had the look of someone drowning in slow motion, trying desperately not to let the children see. He'd seen that look before, on his own mother's face, 35 years ago when his father was in prison, and they were living in a studio apartment with electricity that cut out every other week. The way she counted those bills, the resignation in her shoulders, the forced brightness when she looked at the children, triplets, if he wasn't mistaken. Identical faces, different expressions. Boss, his associate, Tony, had stopped talking. You want me to handle it? Handle what? Dominic refocused. The Ferretti situation. Later, Dominic said, I'm thinking. He was thinking about the woman's hands. They were shaking when she counted the money. And he was thinking about the cut of her clothes, good quality once, now worn at the seams. Someone who'd known better days. Recently, from the look of it, the children were well-behaved. Too well-behaved. The kind of behavior that came from understanding that making a fuss meant making things worse. The boy, dark-haired, serious, watched his mother like a guardian. The two girls flanked him, one chatty, one quiet, but both aware. 7 years old, maybe the same age Dominic had been when he learned that the world was divided into people with power and people without, and that the people without got crushed unless someone with power decided otherwise. Angelo approached the table again, wringing his hands. Mr. Montanari, can I get you anything else? The osso buco tonight is exceptional. My wife's recipe. Who's that? Dominic nodded toward Rebecca's table. Angelo followed his gaze, and his expression shifted to something sad. Rebecca Stevens. Good woman. Her husband died about 6 months ago. Construction accident. She used to come in here with the family every Friday night. Her, the triplets. Always polite. Always left a good tip. Used to. Haven't seen her in months. Till tonight. Angelo lowered his voice. I heard she's having trouble. Lost her job. Medical bills from when her husband died. Maria told me the kids said it was their birthday, so she's trying to do something nice for them, but he gestured at the crumpled bills still visible on their table. Dominic said nothing for a long moment. Then what else do you know? Not much. She lives in the old apartments on 7th Street. The ones Kowalski manages. Angelo's mouth twisted with distaste. That's all I know. You want me to? No, Dominic said quietly. Just bring me the check for their table. Boss, they haven't even. Their check, Angelo. Whatever they order tonight. And box up some of the osso buco. The good portions. Enough for 4 people, plus extra for tomorrow. Angelo's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. Of course, Mr. Montanari. When he left, Tony leaned in. You know her? No. Then why? Dominic turned to look at his associate, and Tony immediately shut up. Some questions you didn't ask. Some things the boss did were the boss's business, and you learned to leave it alone. But Dominic was thinking about his mother again. About the night a stranger had paid their electric bill, anonymously, during the worst winter of his childhood. About how small acts of power, wielded correctly, could change everything. And he was thinking about Jerry Kowalski, whose name had just come up in conversation. Kowalski, who managed properties for a shell corporation that Dominic had traced back to the Ferretti family. The same family currently trying to muscle into his territory on the east side. Interesting. Maria brought out the spaghetti, and Dominic watched as the woman, Rebecca, carefully portioned it onto 4 plates, giving the children the larger shares, keeping barely any for herself. She did it naturally, without fuss, the way mothers did when they'd been going hungry to feed their children for too long. The triplets dug in with appetite, and Rebecca smiled at them. A real smile, the first Dominic had seen from her. It transformed her face completely, and he understood suddenly that she'd been beautiful once, before exhaustion and fear had carved lines around her eyes. She was still beautiful, actually, just buried under survival mode. Excuse me, he said, standing abruptly. I'll be back. He crossed the restaurant in 6 strides, his bodyguards automatically flanking him. Rebecca looked up as his shadow fell across the table, and fear flashed across her face. Dominic hated that look, hated that his presence inspired it, but he learned to use it when necessary. Mrs. Stevens? Her eyes widened. Ah, yes. I'm sorry to interrupt your dinner. He kept his voice gentle, the same tone he used with his own daughter. I'm Dominic Montanari. May I speak with you for a moment? She glanced at the children, then back at him, calculating, afraid, but also desperate enough to listen. It's okay, Mama, the boy said quietly. Smart kid. Rebecca stood slowly, wiping her hands on her jeans. What is this about? Dominic gestured to an empty table a few feet away, close enough that she could see the children, far enough for privacy. She followed reluctantly, her body language screaming flight risk. When they sat, he studied her for a moment. Up close, the exhaustion was even more apparent. Shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. The slight tremor in her hands. The way she held herself, like someone expecting the next blow. How much do you owe Kowalski? He asked directly. The color drained from her face. I don't. How much? She swallowed hard. $3,000 for $100. 3 months back rent. But I don't see what business that is of. When's the eviction? Friday. Her voice cracked. But I'm going to fix it. I have a job interview tomorrow. And if I can just get an advance. What happened to your husband? The change of subject threw her. He died 6 months ago. Construction accident. A beam fell, and she stopped, pressing her lips together hard. I don't understand what you want from me, Mr. Moninari. I don't want anything from you, Dominic said quietly. I want to know who's responsible for your current situation. She stared at him. Responsible? Your husband's accident. The insurance denial. The eviction. Someone is making money off your suffering, Mrs. Stevens. I'd like to know who. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, suspiciously, why? Because I can do something about it. She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Right. And what do you want in return? Because I don't have anything to give you, Mr. Moninari. No money, no information, no. I don't want anything in return. He held her gaze steadily. I want to help. Nobody helps for free. Especially not. She caught herself, but he knew what she'd been about to say. Especially not men like you. You're right, he acknowledged. But think of it this way. I'm not helping you. I'm correcting an injustice. There's a difference. She looked back at the triplets, who were watching anxiously while pretending not to. The protective instinct written all over her face was so fierce, it was almost physical. The construction company your husband worked for, Dominic continued. Who owned it? Ferretti Construction, she said slowly. But they went out of business after the accident. Declared bankruptcy. The lawyer I consulted said there was nothing I could do. Ferretti. Of course it was. And the insurance company that denied your claim? Summit Health Insurance. They said David had a pre-existing heart condition that contributed to his death, so they wouldn't pay out the life insurance policy or cover the medical bills. Her hands clenched into fists. He didn't have a heart condition. He was healthy. He just got crushed by a beam that wasn't properly secured because they were cutting corners on safety to save money. Do you have documentation? The denial letter? Medical records? Yes, but what does it matter? I can't afford a lawyer to fight it. And even if I could, it would take years and... Give me the documents, Dominic said, in the name of the landlord threatening to evict you. I already told you. Jerry Kowalski. No, the actual owner. The person Kowalski works for. Rebecca shook her head. I don't know. Some corporation. The rent goes to an account, but there's no name on the checks. Dominic already knew the answer, but he wanted to hear her say it. What's the name of the corporation? She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, found something, and showed him. Skyline Property Holdings. Bingo. Skyline was a Ferretti shell company. They'd used it to acquire properties in Dominic's territory over the past 3 years, slowly building a foothold. And now they were squeezing tenants, collecting eviction fees and security deposits, churning through vulnerable families to maximize profit. Families like Rebecca Stevens and her triplets. Mr. Moninari, Rebecca said carefully, I appreciate whatever you think you're doing, but I can't get involved in anything illegal. I have children to think about. I'm not asking you to get involved in anything, he said. I'm asking you to let me handle a problem that I should have handled a long time ago. Why do you care? It was a fair question. Dominic considered his answer carefully. Because 35 years ago, someone paid my mother's electric bill when we were about to freeze in the dark. Anonymous. No strings. Just someone who saw a situation they could fix and fixed it. He paused. I've spent my whole life trying to pay that forward. It wasn't entirely true. He'd spent his whole life building power, accumulating control, doing things that would horrify this woman if she knew the details. but the core of it was true enough. And he could see in her eyes that she wanted to believe him. "Here's what's going to happen," Dominic said. "You and the children are going to finish your dinner. Maria's going to box up some osso buco for you to take home, enough for several meals. When you leave tonight, you'll find an envelope in your purse. Inside will be $5,000 cash. That's to cover your rent and give you breathing room to find steady work." Rebecca's eyes went wide. "I can't." "You can, and you will. For the children." He kept his voice firm but gentle. "Tomorrow, my attorney will contact you. His name is Robert Johnson. He's legitimate, licensed, works with families in housing disputes. He'll handle the insurance company and review your husband's case. No charge to you. Mr. Montanari, let me finish. You're going to need a new apartment. The one you're in now is going to become unavailable. My assistant will call you Friday with a list of places in better neighborhoods. Safe. Good schools nearby. Reasonable rent. First and last month free." Tears were streaming down Rebecca's face now. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I can," Dominic said simply. "Because those children deserve better than what the Ferrettis left them with. And because Jerry Kowalski has been operating in my neighborhood, hurting my people, and I take that personally." He stood, and she scrambled to her feet as well. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll accept the help. Say you'll put those babies in a good home and feed them proper meals and let them be children again." His voice roughened slightly. "Say you'll survive this, Mrs. Stevens. That's all I need to hear." She nodded, unable to speak. Dominic reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "This is my personal number. If anyone bothers you, anyone at all, you call me immediately. Understand?" Another nod. "Good. Now, go back to your children. It's their birthday. They should see their mother smile." He returned to his own table, where Tony was pretending very hard not to have been watching the whole exchange. "We're leaving," Dominic announced. "But first, make a call. I want everything we have on Ferretti Construction, Summit Health Insurance, and Jerry Kowalski on my desk by morning. Everything. Boss. Everything, Tony. I want to know what they eat for breakfast and how many parking tickets they've never paid. I want their sins documented and their connections mapped. Can you handle that?" "Yes, sir." "Good." Dominic stood, dropped $500 bills on the table for Angelo, and walked out of the restaurant. Behind him, he could hear Rebecca Stevens crying softly as she returned to her children, and the sound of the triplets asking if she was okay, and her telling them yes, everything was going to be okay now. The next morning, Dominic's office looked like a war room. Files covered every surface. 3-ring binders, manila folders, printed emails, bank statements, property records. His team had worked through the night, and they'd found a gold mine. Ferretti Construction had indeed gone bankrupt after David Stevens' death. But, and this was the interesting part, they'd immediately reopened under a new name with the exact same management. Crystal Bridge Contracting. Same corner cutting. Same safety violations. They paid a $50,000 fine for the accident that killed David Stevens, then dissolved the company to avoid the wrongful death lawsuit Rebecca's attorney had tried to file. Summit Health Insurance was a subsidiary of a larger corporation that the Ferretti family had partial ownership in. They specialized in denying claims through technicalities buried in the fine print. David Stevens' supposed pre-existing heart condition was based on a single elevated blood pressure reading from 5 years prior, during a visit for the flu. Jerry Kowalski was an independent contractor who managed properties for multiple shell corporations, all connected to Ferretti interests. He had 47 eviction proceedings currently active, 47 families being squeezed for every penny, then thrown out so the apartments could be flipped and rented at higher rates. The Ferretti family thought they were being clever, thought they could operate in Dominic's territory through shell companies and intermediaries, slowly building power while he was distracted with other matters. They were wrong. Dominic picked up his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Robert? It's Dominic. I need you to take a case." "Yes, I know you don't usually do insurance disputes, but you're going to make an exception. Rebecca Stevens, widow of David Stevens. I'm sending over the files now. I want Summit Health Insurance buried. I want every claim they've denied in the past 5 years reviewed. I want a class action lawsuit that makes the national news." He hung up and dialed another number. "Commissioner? Dominic Montanari. I have information about construction safety violations you'll want to see. Crystal Bridge Contracting. Yes, the same people who were Ferretti Construction. I thought you might be interested. One more call. Jerry? It's Dominic. No, I don't think we've formally met, but we have mutual acquaintances. I'm calling about the building on 7th Street. The one where you're evicting tenants. Because I just bought it, along with every other property you manage for Skyline Holdings. The sale went through at midnight. Paid cash. Above market value. The Ferrettis were very motivated to sell once my lawyer explained the liability issues. So here's what's going to happen, Jerry. You're going to call every single one of those 47 families you're trying to evict, and you're going to apologize. You're going to tell them the evictions are canceled. You're going to offer to reduce their rent by 20%. And then you're going to find a new line of work because you're done managing my properties. Jerry? Jerry, I really wouldn't hang up if I were you. We're not finished talking. By the time Dominic ended the call, Jerry Kowalski had agreed to everything and promised to be out of the city by the end of the week. 3 days later, Rebecca Stevens stood in the lobby of an office building, holding an envelope that had arrived by courier that morning. Inside was a key, an address, and a simple note. New apartment. Safe neighborhood. Good schools. First 6 months free. You've earned a fresh start. She'd already met with Robert Johnson, the attorney, who'd explained in detail how he was going to destroy Summit Health Insurance's denial of her claims. He'd also mentioned, casually, as if it were no big deal, that he discovered evidence that Ferretti Construction had been systematically violating safety regulations and that criminal charges were likely forthcoming. David's death might finally be recognized as the preventable tragedy it was. Jerry Kowalski had called her personally to stutter out an apology and inform her that all eviction proceedings were canceled and her rent was being reduced. He'd sounded terrified. She didn't ask why. And this morning, she'd received a job offer from a company she'd interviewed with weeks ago. Good pay, benefits, flexible hours for parents. The hiring manager had mentioned that a colleague had recommended her highly, though Rebecca couldn't imagine who. She suspected, though. The new apartment was in a neighborhood she'd only driven through before, the kind with trees lining the streets and playgrounds where children laughed without supervision. The building was clean, well-maintained, with a security entrance and a doorman who smiled when she walked in with the triplets. The apartment itself was on the 4th floor, bright with sunlight from large windows that looked out over a small park. 2 bedrooms, one for her, one for the triplets, though it was large enough that they'd each have space. Hardwood floors, a kitchen with appliances that actually worked, a bathroom with water pressure and no mysterious stains. It was perfect. Emily, Noah, and Sophie ran from room to room, exclaiming over every detail. The closets, the light switches, the fact that the heat worked and you could adjust it yourself. Rebecca stood in the living room, holding the keys so tightly it left an impression in her palm, and cried. Not the desperate, hopeless tears of the past 6 months. These were different. These were tears of relief, so profound it felt like a physical weight lifting from her chest, allowing her to breathe fully for the first time since David died. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Mrs. Stevens? A woman's voice, professional but warm. This is Patricia Montanari. I'm calling on behalf of my father. Rebecca's breath caught. Oh, tell him thank you. Please. I don't know how to. He doesn't need thanks, Patricia said gently. But he did want me to remind you that if anyone bothers you, anyone at all, you're to call him immediately. And he wanted you to know that Crystal Bridge Contracting is being investigated by the Department of Labor. The people responsible for your husband's death are going to face consequences. They are. My father is very thorough about correcting injustices. After the call ended, Rebecca walked to the window and looked out at the park below. A couple was pushing a child on a swing. A dog chased a ball across the grass. Normal. Safe. The kind of life she'd thought was lost forever. 2 months later, Dominic sat in his office reading a news article about the massive settlement Summit Health Insurance had agreed to pay in a class action lawsuit involving denied claims. Robert had done excellent work. 43 families were receiving compensation. The company was under federal investigation. Crystal Bridge contracting had been shut down permanently, with 3 executives facing criminal charges for negligent homicide and safety violations. David Stevens' case was being cited as the key example of their systematic disregard for worker safety. The Ferretti family had lost significant assets in the forced sale of their property holdings and was now occupied with defending themselves on multiple fronts. They'd pulled back from their territorial expansion entirely, focused on survival. And Jerry Kowalski had left the city, as promised. Last Dominic heard, he was selling used cars in Nevada. His phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Saw Rebecca Stevens at the grocery store today. She looks good, Dad. Healthy. The kids were laughing. Thought you'd want to know. Dominic smiled slightly and texted back. Thanks for letting me know. He didn't need thanks from Rebecca Stevens. Didn't need acknowledgement or recognition. He'd simply corrected an injustice, the way that an anonymous stranger had corrected an injustice for his mother 35 years ago. The way he would continue to do for as long as he had the power to do it. 5 years later, on a crisp October evening, Rebecca Stevens stood outside Angelo's family restaurant with 3 12-year-olds who were arguing about which pizza toppings to order. Pepperoni, Sophie insisted. That's boring. Mushrooms and olives, Emily countered. Can we get both? Noah asked, always the diplomat. Rebecca smiled, listening to them bicker. They were tall now, growing like weeds, each developing their own distinct personality. Sophie was all fire and confidence. Emily was thoughtful and artistic. Noah was gentle and protective, the one who still checked on her when he thought she was worried about something. They were thriving. The new apartment had become home. Rebecca's job had turned into a career with a promotion last year that meant real financial security. The kids were in a good school, with friends and after-school activities and all the normal chaos of childhood. They talked about David still, keeping his memory alive with stories and photos, but the sharp edge of grief had softened into something bearable. They came to Angelo's every year on the Triplets' birthday. A tradition, a reminder. This year, though, Rebecca had a second reason for the visit. Inside the restaurant, Maria greeted them with a warm hug. The usual table. Actually, Rebecca said, is Mr. Montanari here tonight? Maria's eyebrows rose. He is, actually, in the back corner. You want me to? Just tell him Rebecca Stevens would like to say thank you, if he has a moment. 5 minutes later, Dominic Montanari approached their table. He'd aged slightly, more silver in his hair, a few more lines around his eyes, but he carried himself with the same quiet authority Rebecca remembered from that night 5 years ago. Mrs. Stevens, he said, inclining his head slightly. Mr. Montanari, thank you for seeing us. She stood, suddenly nervous. I wanted to introduce you to my children. Properly. Emily, Noah, Sophie, this is the man I told you about. The triplets looked up at him with a mixture of curiosity and awe. They knew the story, knew what he'd done for their family. Rebecca had told them everything when they were old enough to understand, because she believed they deserved to know that sometimes power was wielded to protect instead of harm. It's nice to meet you, Noah said solemnly, extending his hand. Dominic shook it gravely. You as well. All of you. Are you really in the Mafia? Sophie asked bluntly. Sophie, Rebecca gasped. But Dominic laughed. A genuine sound of amusement. I'm a businessman with complicated interests. Your mother can explain the difference when you're older. That's a yes, Emily whispered to her sister. I wanted to thank you, Rebecca said, for everything you did, for giving us our lives back. I don't think I ever really expressed. You didn't need to, Dominic interrupted gently. Seeing you all here like this is thanks enough. Still, I needed to say it, and I wanted you to know that your kindness didn't just help us. It taught me something about power, about how it can be used to build instead of destroy. She paused. I volunteer now at a shelter for families facing eviction. I help them navigate the legal system, find resources, fight back against predatory landlords. Because of what you taught me, something shifted in Dominic's expression. Surprise, maybe, and something that might have been pride. That's good work, he said quietly. It is, and it's work I can do because you gave me the stability to do it. She smiled. So thank you. For the apartment, for the job connections, for the justice you brought against the people who hurt my family. But mostly, Thank you for showing me that power doesn't have to be cruel, that sometimes it can be merciful. Dominic looked at the three children, then back at Rebecca. Your husband will be proud of you. Of all of you. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I think he would be. They talked for a few more minutes, small talk about school and work and the changes in the neighborhood. Then Dominic excused himself, returning to his own table where Patricia was waiting with raised eyebrows. That was Rebecca Stevens? She asked. Yes. She looks good. Happy. She is. Patricia studied her father's face. You did a good thing there, Dad. I corrected an injustice, he said, using the same phrase he'd used 5 years ago. There's a difference. But he was smiling when he said it. Outside, the October evening had turned cool. Rebecca and the triplets walked home through streets that felt safe, past the park where they'd spent countless afternoons, toward the apartment that had become their sanctuary. Mom, Noah asked, do you think we'll ever see him again? I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe. I hope we do, Emily said. He seems nice. For maybe Mafia person. Emily, Rebecca laughed. We don't say that out loud. But it's true. Still. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the three children flanking their mother the way they always did, protective even in their confidence. Mom, Sophie asked, are we going to be okay? Like forever okay? Rebecca stopped walking and pulled all three of them into a hug, right there on the sidewalk. Yes, baby. We're going to be okay. We are okay. We're more than okay. We're happy. We're safe. We're together. That's everything. And it was. Later that night, after the triplets were asleep, Rebecca stood at the window of their apartment looking out at the city lights. She thought about David, who would have loved to see his children now. She thought about the journey from that desperate night 5 years ago to this moment of peace. And she thought about Dominic Montanari, who'd wielded his considerable power to lift up instead of crush down, who'd seen a family in crisis and decided to do something about it. She didn't understand his world. Probably never would. But she understood that within it, there was a man who remembered what it felt like to be powerless, and who'd chosen to spend his power protecting people who reminded him of that younger self. That was enough. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Happy birthday to the triplets. May they continue to thrive. DM. Rebecca smiled and texted back. Thank you. For everything. Always. She didn't expect a response and didn't get one. But somehow she knew the message had been received, and that somewhere in the city, Dominic Montanari was satisfied with the outcome of a choice he'd made 5 years ago. A choice to correct an injustice. A choice to protect the vulnerable. A choice that had changed 4 lives completely, and possibly his own in ways he might never fully articulate. Rebecca turned from the window and went to check on the children one more time. Emily was sprawled across her bed, blankets kicked off. Noah slept with mathematical precision, perfectly centered on the mattress. Sophie was curled in a ball, clutching the stuffed bear that had been a gift from her father before he died. They were safe. They were loved. They were going to be okay. And that, Rebecca thought, as she gently pulled blankets over her sleeping children, was justice in its purest form. Not revenge, not charity, just the simple act of making things right when the world had made them wrong. She closed the door softly and returned to her own room, where she slept soundly through the night for the first time in 6 years, knowing that tomorrow would be okay, and the day after that, and all the days that followed. In his office across town, Dominic Montanari closed the file on the Stevens family and placed it in a cabinet marked Resolved. There were dozens of other files in that cabinet, each representing a moment when he'd chosen to use his power to correct rather than control. It didn't balance the scales for everything else he did. He wasn't naive enough to think that helping one widow and her children made up for the darker aspects of his business. But it was something, and sometimes something was enough. He turned off the lights and went home to his own family, carrying with him the knowledge that somewhere in this city, 3 children slept safely because he'd chosen to see them, because he'd chosen to act, because he'd remembered what it felt like to be powerless and decided to do something about someone else's powerlessness. The world was still cruel. Injustice still flourished. But in one small corner of his territory, 3 children had their childhood back. And that was a kind of victory, too.